Why, welcome to the remodeled DoDCast. It's not fair to say it's new and improved, but it is remodeled. And joining me is the subject of tonight's show, my new co-editor, boss in crime, work partner, work husband or wife, whatever he wants to be. Drew Douglas, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Why don't you take a moment to tell folks who you are and a little bit about yourself who may not have caught you during any of your post games?
All right, so like Ron said, my name is Drew Douglas. I'm currently a freshman at Virginia Tech. I'm studying multimedia journalism and specifically sports media and analytics. I've been a fan of the Nationals since they came back to DC in 2005, and really my life revolves around the Nationals and baseball. So I'm very excited to begin as a site expert, and I hope Ron and I are able to keep the site at as high of a level as we can, and I look forward to being a site expert now.
We are in very good hands. Drew has written for us, I believe, since the end of February,
Yes.
and was pretty much has done a several-month intern for this position as we knew that Ricky would be moving on. So we are all in safe hands with Mr. Douglas. And so let's start with this before we get to chat or anything like that. And hello, Seth, how are you? Um, you wrote an article about Game 5, but just you weren't on with Ricky and I at the wee hours of Friday morning. Just again, your impressions, what could have changed in Game 5, how you feeling about things right now and all that.
Yeah, Game 5 is just so depressing because while the Nationals have never made it out of the first round of the playoffs, something about this year just felt like this would be the year. And now, obviously, they weren't able to get it done, and it's another early exit for the Nationals. And just being at the stadium is very depressing. Just everyone is kind of just frustrated that it was another early exit. And me personally, I was very frustrated with Matt Wieters specifically. Although he did finally get off the schneid and he had a couple hits, including a bunt single early, he did have a few defensive blunders in that costly fifth inning when Scherzer was on the mound. So, while it is a team sport and not one player is to be blamed for an entire loss, I thought Matt Wieters didn't do too much to help his case on that night.
Yeah, and because he has the opt-out that he controls, I mean, no one else is giving him $10.5 million next year. So he's stuck with the Nationals. Let's see, a couple things. We hope to have Seth. We hope to have Ricky back as a special guest at a couple of times next year. But when they play the Yankees, we hope to do that. And this is judo. This is the new judo is now Ricky. I mean, judo is now Ricky. Drew is now Ricky. As far as formal positions, Drew and I are the paid staff for District on Deck, and Ricky has moved on. So this is a formality that now that Drew and I are co-editors for the site. All right. So I guess my first question to you, outside of feeling bad, is what do you think the biggest priority is this off season?
I'd really like to see them bring back Dusty Baker, first of all, just kind of keep the stability as far as the coaching staff goes. And then I really want to see them somehow acquire another starting pitcher because they do have Joe Ross, but he's going to have to miss at least most of the season, if not all of it, due to the Tommy John surgery. So I don't know how close Eric Fedde is to being ready to become a permanent big league starter, and I really don't want to see Edwin Jackson back in any kind of big league role for next season as long as everyone stays healthy. So really like to see Dusty and another starting pitcher for sure.
Yeah, I think Dusty comes back. I know Seth isn't very happy about it. He just asked me about whether Girardi is as manager, but Girardi has a chance to go to the World Series with the Yankees this year. That's not happening. New York will keep him. We'll talk about a little bit of the dumpster fire that is the National League East in a bit. I would agree. I think getting that starting, as you said, I think Fedde is the key, and I think they'll give Cole a long audition too, along with someone that they probably sign. But I do think there's possibly a trade in someone's future because you can't do it all through a free agency. And obviously the kids aren't quite ready to take on the role. And so when I suggested that Michael A. Taylor may or may not be traded this offseason, boy, did I hear about that. I wasn't suggesting that they should trade him, but if you okay, I'll ask you this because I did the article on it. I wouldn't want Billy Hamilton by himself, but if the Reds packaged up a pitcher or a catcher with Billy Hamilton, is that someone you would make a trade for, and who would you move?
Yeah, I would take Hamilton. Like you said, I don't know if I'd take him by himself, but the Nationals, Jose Lobaton is a pending free agent, and I think they'll probably let him go. And Matt Wieters didn't produce too much, so maybe you get some catching depth from the Reds. Or earlier this season, we heard the Nats link to guys like who was it? Raisel Iglesias in the back of their bullpen and a couple other of their pitchers. So maybe we see a trade fills a couple of the Nationals' needs, and guy who Michael Taylor, who is rather valuable, maybe he's the guy that brings a couple of those pieces in.
Right. I mean, it's not, you have the bigger salary players who aren't going to get moved. Bryce Harper only gets moved if he's really determined that he does not want to be back. And even then, I don't think that, that's not something, I don't think that happens in the off season. And no one else is, you're not going to trade Trey Turner. You're not going to trade Anthony Rendon, and you're certainly not trading any of the starting pitching. And so I know that most of the rebuilds on this team have been with, kind of under the radar prospects and Blake Trinan. At some point, the Nationals are going to have to make a deal where they include major league level talent. Now, maybe that's Brian Goodwin, but I can certainly see where a lot of teams are going to be asking about Michael Taylor.
Yeah, you mentioned Brian Goodwin. Nationals really have a surplus of outfielders with, even if Worth leaves, they have Eaton, Taylor, Harper, Goodwin. You have Robles and Soto coming up. You have Andrew Stevenson. There's a ton of outfielders, and obviously there's not room for all of them. So, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see maybe Michael Taylor or maybe more likely Brian Goodwin get dealt this offseason.
I would think that one of the two will go. As far as Dusty is concerned, I think if they were going to fire him at this point, I think that would have already happened. I think if you let him go, he'll be hired by someone else in about 2.15 seconds. And that you lose most of your coaching staff. And in the year that maybe Bryce Harper's last year in Washington, I don't think you want to do that kind of wholesale change, would you?
No, I definitely wouldn't. And the other thing you have to look at is if you do let Dusty go, who are you going to replace him with? There's not a whole lot of experienced managers outside of John Farrell who could come in and take the job.
I don't want John Farrell. Someone suggested that on MLB Trade Rumors today, and discretion being the better part of valor, I kept my mouth shut. You don't want John because of here's the reasons why you don't want John Farrell. Yes, there's the World Series win, but it was surrounded by two last place finishes in the American League East. He broke up his marriage. He had an affair with a reporter, which is completely inappropriate, and then pretty much didn't do anything publicly to dispel the whole Dennis Eckersley, David Price thing, and Dustin Pedroia trying to take over the clubhouse. That's not the type of influence you want there. Seth asks if you would re-sign Matt Albers, and I will say, oh my goodness, absolutely, I would re-sign Matt Albers in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I absolutely would too. I think maybe this year he performed a little better than he's normally capable of, but even if he regresses a little bit, I mean, he was arguably their best reliever this year. So, I don't know if he'll be able to do what he did this year again next year, but I think if he's able to do similar to how he did this year, he'll be a great reliever again next season.
Yeah, I mean, the pressure wasn't really on him, and he was able to, work with Mike Maddox and become quite effective. I have an instant score flash for you. It is the Astros 2, the Yankees nothing in the top of the sixth inning. They just played at 2 runs. What about Brandon Kinsler, who 7 million, 3-0, pardon me. Brandon Kinsler, who has a $7 million deal coming into the year, but likely is going to be a 7th inning guy. Would you pay him $7 million to be a setup guy, or what do you think will be the end part of that?
I think I would let him walk because personally, especially towards the end of the season, I wasn't that impressed with him, and he was an all-star closer this year, so I think someone will sign him to be a closer. And you have Albers who can fill in that role, and also Coda Glover, assuming he's able to remain healthy next season, he can slide into that role too because he was a closer earlier this year, and he was just lights out until he got hurt. So I think Madsen and Dula will be back, and then if you re-sign Albers, and you definitely have Coda Glover coming back, they'll be all right without Kinsler.
Right. And Eddie Romero, I think, improved as the year went along. If he could ever learn to mix his breaking stuff in with his fastballs, he can be a devastating pitcher. I honestly think that if he could actually harness what he has, he could be a closer in waiting. So, as much as I like Kinsler, I thought it was a great deal at the time. I'm with you. I think that's money that could be better spent elsewhere. Seth says, don't trade my favorite player, Roddy Reed. My concern about Reed, Seth, I don't think they'll trade him, is that he's not very good defensively. I was talking with a guy that runs the Nats prospect sites when he came up and he wore the number 62, and he said 62 matches the amount of balls that he couldn't field this year, which was very funny. But that kind of worries me. And Severino in his audition in September was terrible. Let's be honest about it. He had the chance to put himself on the playoff roster, and we ended up with Lobaton instead, who actually, played had it for him a decent thing, but that's not someone you want behind the plate for 50, 60 games. Reed can hit, as Seth says, but I don't think he really has a future as a major league catcher. Maybe they convert him to someplace else, but not a catcher. Seth said, I honestly could see Bryce Harper in the Red Sox. I don't. I tell you why. I think if he does leave, it's going to be for New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles, someplace that the Red Sox have the money, but there's really not much else that Boston can offer if he wants to leave. I don't want to speculate where I think he's going to go. I think there's a good chance that he stays, actually, but I don't see Harper with the Red Sox. Judo says that I just don't think you can sell Taylor. Robles has not a lot of upside, but with the prospect of Harper leaving. Yeah, I read that right. Leaving, I think you have to keep the known talent. What you don't want to do is go all in next season because Bryce might be leaving. I don't think their window closes when Harper leaves. Do you? I mean, you know this team pretty well.
No, I don't think so. I think they have a lot of young talent already at the big league level, and I think the pipeline is also very good with, especially in the outfield with Victor Robles and Juan Soto coming up. So I think, Harper is a great talent. If he goes, I think they'll be just fine.
Yeah, no, I think they had probably the last best chance with Dusty if he comes back, and certainly, we haven't talked about, and we'll talk about Daniel Murphy being a free agent at the end of next year as well. It definitely will be a different team come 2019. But I think there's a sense of urgency just because of some of the people that are involved. And it's not just Bryce Harper. Juno says trade Sean Kelly for cash if that's all that's available. Kelly's so hurt right now. I would not be surprised if he retired.
Yeah, I think he's getting elbow surgery this offseason, so he's already had a couple Tommy Johns. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't be surprised if he just decided to hang up his spikes this offseason.
I mean, he just looked so out of his element. I don't think he ever recovered from whatever happened in Game 5 of the NLDS last year. And it showed. So let's talk about some of the other possible other free agents that the Nats have. Albers we've talked about. Brett Kinsler we've talked about. Do you actually see a place for Jason Worth on this team next year?
Definitely not in a starting role. I think if he wanted to come back as kind of a fourth outfielder and just for a couple $1 million on a 1-year deal, I would take him. But yeah, I don't think he has a role as a starter on this team anymore.
No, he's a part-time DH for an American League club, whether that club is a contender or not. I personally think he got a raw deal from a lot of fans at the end of the year, but I don't know where you would play him. Stephen Drew, do you think there's a place for him, or has Wilmer Defoe's versatility kind of pushed him out?
I don't know. I like Drew. I like Defoe a lot, but if you look at his numbers, he's really kind of struggled a little bit if he's not getting regular playing time. And we saw Drew when he was healthy; he was great off the bench. So I think maybe I'd take Drew back just because you don't know what you're getting from Defoe if he's not getting regular at bats. But if someone gets hurt, like Trey Turner was out for a while this year, I would take Defoe over Drew in that instance, just because we saw what Defoe was capable of when playing every day.
Right. I mean, Defoe really just kind of fell off at the end of the year when he was on the bench. But until they make a decision about what to do with Daniel Murphy at the end of the next year, there really is no place to put him. So it either goes down to wherever the Nats play AAA baseball next year and plays every day, or does this super utility thing, which please don't be center field, please don't be center field again. But he can play the other all the infield positions and be a valuable service with a good chance of him being the opening day second baseman in 2019. So I get the other name off the top of my head is Howie Kendrick.
I liked Kendrick a lot. I thought he played good defense both at second base and in the outfield. We even saw him at first base a little bit towards the end of the season. So he does provide defensive versatility, and he was just a good veteran bat off the bench. I thought him and Adam Lind really bolstered the bench and just provided some great at-bats late in games against tough relievers. So, yeah, I would definitely take Kendrick back if he wants to come back.
You don't think he actually wants to play?
Yeah, I would think he wants to go and start somewhere, but I don't know. I mean, we saw Stephen Drew last season. We thought he deserved to start somewhere, and he came back to be on the Nationals bench. So maybe we see Kendrick back. But, I would love to have him back if he wants to be back.
And let's talk about Adam Lind for a second, because it is a mutual option. And I think if he did not choose the option, that he clearly will get more than $5.5 million. I would think, even though offensive players have really struggled making money in free agency the last few years. It's all been about pitching. What I'd like to see is the Nats give him a 2-year contract, maybe give him a little bit of a raise, because I think that it's just great insurance to have for Ryan Zimmerman. He's not a great outfielder, but he does give you that depth in left field if you need it, and his pinch hitting ability was historic. But then again, I could certainly see other teams coming to Lind and saying, look, just like with Worth, we think you can be a DH and get some time in the field and play 140 games. My hope is that something happens, but my gut is that they lose both Kendrick and Worth. I mean, Kendrick and Lind. You're talking about Worth. I mean, Lind.
Yeah, I don't think Lind will be back next year, just because I think someone will give him a bigger role on their team, whether it's a starting DH or first baseman. But I would love to have him back, just like Howie Kendrick, because he provided great at-bats. And also, Ryan Zimmerman, we saw he stayed healthy for most of the season, but it's something he hasn't shown he's been able to do over the last few seasons, and I'm not sure he'll be able to do it again next season. So it's definitely good to have a guy like Adam Lind who is capable of going in to play first base for a long period of time as Zimmerman were to get hurt.
Oh, absolutely. It's too good of an insurance policy. Maybe they will keep one, and they remember at the end of the year they were trying Kendrick at first base, which could be a sign that he's towards the end of his career and just would like the chance to play 110 games, which I think he could. Start at about 50, pinch hitting about 50, and be a defensive replacement. All right, go ahead.
And Daniel Murphy's another guy who's played first base in the past. So if something were to happen to Zimmerman and he was hurt, you could always slide Murphy over to first and put Defoe at second base.
Right, and Defoe's defense is much better than Murphy's. Although I will give Murphy credit for this. His defense in the last couple of weeks of the year and the playoffs was actually quite good. I mean, sometimes, I would sit there in the course of a game, and because Ricky was more familiar with him from his days of the Mets, and he would tell me, no, his defense was better in Washington than it was with New York, and Murphy would butcher a ball, and I said, really? He was better than he was with the Mets? Yep, okay. So, all right. So Seth asks, or comments and then asks. English is a wonderful language for me. If Kelly's on the team next year, I will riot. No, there's no reason to riot. I really think he's done. I don't think he has any trade value. It may be a case of he gets to camp, they let him audition, and if he gets Christmas treat early, they may say, we're not going to put you on. You can go sit in AAA, or you can retire. And if he retires, then he doesn't get the money. But that's fine. Seth asks, do we think Ryan Zimmerman will produce like he did this year? To ask someone in their mid-30s to keep pounding 36, 37 home runs is a lot to ask. If he's healthy, he certainly is capable of doing close to what he did again this year. I know that when the when the projections come out for 2018, they're not going to be that kind to him. But he's such a streaky hitter. He is either ice cold or white hot. So, I think it'd be nice if he did, but I wouldn't expect it. But I don't think we're going back to 240 and 15 homers and 100 strikeouts, though.
Yeah, I agree. I think if he stays healthy, he'll be able to produce close to what he did this year, but not quite as good. And everyone was saying that he was doing so well because he had worked with Murphy and improved his launch angles and continued to hit the ball hard. But really, he was always insisting it's just because he's healthy. And I really think that's what it was. He was finally healthy for the first time in several seasons. So I think if he's able to remain healthy again next year, he'll have another great season. But I don't know if he'll be able to do that over the course of 162 games.
And because the division is so, I don't want to say dumpster fire isn't that fair of a word, but not very good. I think he'll have plenty of chances to rest during the season to keep him healthy. Hopefully it's a little more competitive and we're not sitting here the last 3 weeks of the season trying to, no, really, it's West Palm Beach all over again. But I do think that some of the older players such as Murph and Zimmerman will get regular rest as long as the Nats have a comfortable bulge in the division. Seth also asks, Judo, you can ask questions too. A follow-up question, do you think Strasburg can pitch like he did late into the season and into the playoffs next year? My God, I hope they just, starts the first start of the year with a Gatorade IV or whatever that extra antibiotic they gave him before Game 4 of the playoffs, and wheel him out there every 5 days. I really think that this was everything that we expected from Steven Strasburg when he came into the big leagues. And as long as he stays healthy, he simplified his delivery, working from the stretch did wonders for him, and I don't see any reason why he wouldn't, as long as he stays healthy.
Yeah, when I was talking to Tom Boswell yesterday, he said that he thinks Strasburg not only got over a hump, but he jumped over a mountain. And just Strasburg was lights out pretty much all year, as long as he was healthy, and especially as we saw in the postseason. And it was really the same thing in 2016. If he was healthy, we saw him get off to that great start where he didn't have a loss through most of the first half. And I think as long as he stays healthy, he'll be great. But kind of like with Zimmerman, that's going to be the big question, is whether or not he's able to stay healthy.
Brian Foley wrote an article this morning on whether or not the Nats should limit innings for starters. I don't think they kind of had that luxury because you never know what's going to happen in a divisional race. But considering that what happened with Chris Sale for the Red Sox in the postseason and some of these other pitchers, how much do you, especially if there is a managerial change, how much do you watch that inning count over the course of a season?
I think you definitely have to keep an eye on it, but it's also just people like to look at just pitch counts and inning counts, but it's also like how the leverage of the inning, because not all innings are equal. If you're pitching out of trouble, then it's going to be more stressful and put more on your arm. But I think you have to keep an eye on like who really the Nationals have that can come up and start, because right now they don't have a whole lot of starting pitching depth that's ready to come up and pitch at the big league level. And so kind of limiting your starters is going to be difficult to do without that depth to come up and kind of take some of those innings.
Yeah, I would agree. I'll put you on the spot here. Is there anyone that you're seeing on another team or as a possible free agent that you would like to target for a fifth starter?
A guy that I really liked this year, he pitched for the Reds, was Scott Feldman. I thought he would be a perfect fifth starter for the Nationals after Joe Ross got hurt, and then he ended up getting hurt himself towards the end of the year. But I would like to see him come in and be a fifth starter for sure.
And what do you think it would cost to get him?
I think it wouldn't be too costly. He's kind of a veteran guy. He's not spectacular, but he's very consistent. He'll go out there and give you 5-6 innings and keep you in the game. So I know pitching is at a premium right now, and teams are paying like crazy to get pitchers, but I don't think he'd be too expensive compared to other pitchers.
What about someone like Mesorasko that the Reds have as far as a catcher? He's at least a good defensive catcher.
Yeah, I would like him for catching depth, or maybe even starting over Wieters, because he's been good for several years now with Cincinnati, and with the way Wieters played after April, I think Mesoraco would definitely start over him as long as the Nationals aren't concerned about the money, as we've seen with guys in the past. They don't want to pay guys $10.5 million to sit on the bench, but if you're paying that money anyways, might as well get production on the field.
Right. One of the things that before we get to a couple other questions, that caught my ear when getting your Boswell interview done today was this glowing uh, praise of Matt Wieters as a possible manager. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, he said that he thought Wieters would be a great manager, and historically, catchers have made good managers. And another thing that I was looking at is we've seen players go on to be managers, and the great players typically struggle a little bit. And I think Wieters has that working for him, as this year we didn't see too much. I personally thought he was a bad player, so maybe that'd help him become a better manager. But yeah, I think he knows the game really well. The pitchers like throwing to him. It seemed like he called good games for the most part. So I think he could become a good manager in the next 5 or 10 years or whenever his playing career ends.
I was surprised that he didn't say Daniel Murphy. I actually asked Eduardo Perez if I thought that if Murph had managerial qualities, just because he's such a good in-game coach. I mean, he's the one that stopped Scherzer from pitching that night, and we know he talks hitting and launch angles with Zimmerman. I was surprised when he didn't say that. Were you?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised. I think Murphy would make a great manager as well, or hitting coach, or whatever he wants to do. But I think he would definitely make a good coach after his playing career comes to an end.
All right. Before it gets rolled up on the chat scroll here, Seth asks, Drew, did you go to Strasburg's debut in 2010? Because it seems like you go to every other game.
I was not at his debut, but I was actually at his second home start against the Chicago White Sox. So just when he first came into the big leagues, he was absolutely electric, and it was a lot of fun to watch him pitch as a Nationals fan and really just as a baseball fan.
Yeah, that was his debut was on MLB Network. So I actually got to watch that, and it was a huge deal, and he's kind of lived up to it. All right, who's excited for the NBA opening night tonight? Seth asked sarcastically with a thumbs down. It's a big deal. The Celtics are in Cleveland. Kyrie goes back to face LeBron. So, in New England, it might be the only time until April that anyone cares about the NBA. Judo asks, who will the Nats look to when Ryan Zimmerman retires for first base? Now, he signed, I believe, through 19 or 20.
I think it's 20.
It's 20. So we have a ways to go for that. And Seth says, Mike Moustakas, but he's going to get more in free agency. I think it's kind of early to tell who would do that. I mean, Lind himself, if he stayed, would not be a spring chicken. I think he'd be 35, 36 at that point. I'm not sure we can give you an answer unless Drew has a name off the top of his head.
I think a name that I would possibly think could fill in is Jose Marmolejos. He's a first baseman, and over the past 2 seasons, he well, not this year, but 2016, 2015, he was the Nationals minor league player of the year. So I think he could fill in there if he's still with the organization, but he could also be used as a trade chip since Ryan Zimmerman is pretty much has the job pretty much locked down.
Yeah. Zimmerman is not great defensively, but he's not going to hurt you that much. So, I think it's kind of a few years away. Freddie Freeman, Judo said, would be fun and probably be the Daniel Murphy against the Braves. I don't see the Braves willingly getting rid of Freddie Freeman. Just putting it out there. I mean, I actually voted for him as an MVP candidate. I mean, the numbers he put in after missing a quarter of the season were stunning. Judo thinks that Max would be a good pitching coach too. The thing with superstars as coaches is that you're coaching players who aren't as good as you are. It's why people like Magic Johnson struggled in the NBA as a coach, which was why Larry Bird was kind of an afterthought as a coach, because you have so much talent as a player, and just to be around players who don't want to do the work that you do, I think would be very tough. And so Scherzer, with his type A personality, to me does not strike me as a future coach. But thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think also like the Senators had Ted Williams as their manager at one time, and he wasn't a great manager. I think the thing you have to keep in mind with these great players is they just don't understand how certain players can't do this. Like Scherzer, just throw a strike. It's really not that hard. And for other players who aren't as good as him, it is something that is rather difficult. Or just grip it like this and throw it, and it'll work. But not all pitchers are as gifted as Scherzer, obviously. And so while it seems very simple for Scherzer, for other players, it's rather difficult.
You know, Williams was the only manager for the expansion Senators to get a 500 year.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, his record wasn't too bad, but you know, you burn out after a while. And I think for a lot of the reasons that we both explained. Seth asks, would I hire John Farrell as Nats pitching coach? No, only because I don't think the position is going to be open. If they were to fire Dusty, I don't think Farrell wants to go back to being just a pitching coach. He did do a decent job with Boston and a couple other teams before that. You know where I could see John Farrell is in a front office somewhere. I do think that there's some general manager aspirations there. I believe he actually ran part of the show in Cleveland before he was brought to Boston as a pitching coach there. Again, you know, if they make wholesale changes, I don't think Farrell is a bad pitching coach, but you have one of the best in the game in Mike Maddox, so I certainly wouldn't take Farrell over Maddox. Judo says, whatever Freeman's contract is over, I'm sure he's going to want to flee that city. I don't know. You know, there are certain players that just kind of click with their environments. I mean, Chipper Jones stayed all those years, and the Braves weren't that good at the end of his run. You know, I think it depends. I mean, Freddie's in a position where he's not going to, you know, he's never going to have to pay for a drink or a steak in Atlanta ever again. And that's a pretty rare thing to have these days. You know, I think if the Braves can ever get their house in order, I think they're only a couple years away from actually being a reasonable contender for a wild card spot. The problem is that front office is a goo-goo cluster of epic proportions. Bryce Harper, manager 2018. Mike Rizzo, manager, cut up the middleman. Ryan Zimmerman as a player manager. I don't see that. The only one I would see as a potential player manager would actually be with the Mets. I think David Wright is going to be a manager at some point. I'm not sure if he's ever going to play again. You know, I think David Wright is going to be a manager at some point. I don't know what Zimmerman's aspirations are at the end of his career, and I don't think. The Marlins brought in the GM at one point to manage on the field, and that didn't go very well. I don't think Rizzo wants to put on a uniform and deal with all those egos all day. It's easier to sit there and judge talent than it is to actually try to make those levers work. But I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. I think that my guess is, yeah, you can be worse than Terry Collins, you know. You could be John Farrell. My guess is one with an option for Dusty. What do you think?
Yeah, I would give him one with an option. I think just bring him back and see if he can win a postseason series, because it's something we've seen he struggled with in the past. But I don't think it's necessarily his fault that they haven't won the postseason. I mean, the offense was something to be desired for the most part this series, and just a lot of sloppy mistakes, especially in Game 5. So I don't think you can put that all on Dusty. And yeah, I would love to see him back for at least one more season. Although something you have to keep in mind is he is already 68 years old, so you don't know how much longer he's going to want to be out there managing and working every day for 8 months, 9 months.
I don't really think, though, that you would, if this team has a seismic change going into 19, no more Harper, no more Murphy, at that point, I think you would want to get a younger manager in there. Just because, look, I don't think the championship window closes, but you're going to be looking at a fundamentally different team in 2019. I don't think they keep both Harper and Murphy. No, I don't think David Wright can be worse than Terry Collins. I think David Wright actually has all the chops to be a very good manager, which kind of dovetails into Seth's question is, what happens if Don Mattingly gets fired from Miami? You know, Don Mattingly seems to be safe. Derek Jeter's cleaning house there, and Mattingly is the one person that's not taking. There won't be a Giancarlo Stanton and probably a Christian Yelich there next year, but there will be a Don Mattingly, which kind of is a strange thing. I don't think I've been a reader of Howard Cole's pieces for years, and know how much that Cole absolutely despised Mattingly as manager for the Dodgers. I don't think that would be a good situation for Washington. The Red Sox have talked with really want Alex Cora, which I'm excited about for them. But I would take a look at Lloyd McClendon if that was the case. If he doesn't get hired this year, if somehow Alex Cora finally doesn't get goes another year without getting a job, he's looking for his first spot. I would even go with Eduardo Perez. He's still a relatively young man. He's my age. We'll pretend we're young, okay? Drew doesn't think so, but we'll pretend that I'm young. I think there are other ones out there. I'd be curious to see what happens with Joe McEwing. He's a bench coach in Chicago. It's interesting that both Osmus and Robin Ventura turned down the Mets. How bad is that job? When a manager of the capacity of Brad Osmus says, "No, I don't think so." Wow. But right now, I think it's Dusty for at least one more year. At that point, let's see. What else do we want to talk about? Anything pop up for you?
Nothing I can think of other than the impact that losing Syracuse would have on the team.
Yeah, we can talk about that for a sec. I'm 45, Seth. I'll be 46 in November. I'm ancient. Somewhat. Oh, Aaron Judge just bond one into Westchester County. 450 feet, dead center. It's now 4-1. With nobody out in the bottom of the seventh. As far as the Mets have purchased the Syracuse AAA club, the Chiefs, or the Sky Chiefs. I think they're the Chiefs. And so this will either be the Nats last year in Syracuse, or if something can happen as far as a swap of teams in different cities, the Mets could have it this year, and Syracuse would move for the 18 season. The Mets are leaving Las Vegas. The Nats probably want nothing to do with Las Vegas. But Nashville is Oakland's AAA team, and it makes a lot more sense for Oakland to have their minor league team. In fact, I think the A's played in Las Vegas before too, which would leave a year in Nashville for the Nats to decide what they want to do. If they want to join the chorus of teams that are buying AAA teams, or see what else shakes out. Because really, Richmond and Norfolk would be much better, but they're both owned by Baltimore Oriole-friendly teams. And I think, isn't there a stadium issue in Richmond? Can they not do AAA there? They're the AA team right. They're AA team right now. Did I lose you?
Oh no. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with Richmond. I think I did read that. Yes, they cannot be a AAA team. So yeah, I don't think they would work. But yeah, I would love to see the Nationals have their AAA affiliate in Nashville. Like you said, it makes a whole lot of sense for both the Nats and the A's.
The only downside to Nashville, and this isn't a joke, is that they would move to the Pacific Coast League. Now, there are a number of teams that are not in the Pacific time zone in the Pacific Coast League, but you find yourself with a number of nights that you're sitting there in Bakersfield and Fresno and all that. But that's not a deal breaker. The Cubs AAA team is in Iowa, and they're a PCL team in that. So I think if they can do something with that. Let's see. Judo says, I actually think Scherzer, Strasburg, Trey, and Rendon are more important than Murph and Bryce. I'm glad their future is more secure. But Rendon needs to be signed to a long-term deal relatively soon, because I believe he only has 2 more years of arbitration left. Scherzer and Strasburg are going to stay for a while. Scherzer's going to age before our very eyes, and in 4 or 5 years we'll be arguing about whether he's worth his money. I'm not looking forward to those arguments. But yeah, you're right. And no, look, they really missed Bryce Harper when he was hurt. I mean, if the money's too big, the money's too big. Boswell kind of threw him under the bus when you talked to him yesterday. Harper, talk about that for a second.
Yeah, he mentioned we were talking about Strasburg, and he said that Strasburg kind of has the reputation of being soft, but since 2012, he's pitched. He started the 25th most games among active starting pitchers. He's above guys like Felix Hernandez and David Price, and he's just barely behind Clayton Kershaw. But then if you look at Harper, who has a reputation of kind of playing with his hair on fire, and he's always out in the field for the team, he's played in the 90th most games since 2013. And so Harper kind of hasn't consistently been on the field. And when he is on the field, he is a great player for the most part, except for we saw in 2016 he was most likely playing hurt and struggled a little bit. But he isn't consistently on the field. And if he is going to demand $400 to $500 million in free agency, Boswell mentioned that money is fungible. And what that means is that $400 to $500 million that you'd give to Harper, you can sign several free agents or lock up guys like Anthony Rendon and Trey Turner, and kind of bring in a lot of talent, except instead of just having one guy. And then the big question would be if they can reciprocate the presence that Harper brings to the middle of the lineup. So Boswell kind of sounded like he wanted the Nationals to just let Harper go because he's not consistently on the field, and you could get several players for the price of one.
I don't want to turn this into a should he stay or should he go debate. I just thought that the point was very fascinating, considering everything that Bryce Harper brings to the table. We can get into that later. I just said that's the first real negative Washington reaction I've heard of Bryce Harper. And that was pretty thinly veiled. he may have said he didn't mean anything by it, but I did not get that sense from the tone of voice. You have to listen to the show that we put up earlier today from Drew. All right, who y'all rooting for in the World Series? I'm hoping either Kershaw or Verlander gets a ring. Well, Kate Upton will get a ring at some point. The World Series ring is another story, but I'd like to see the Dodgers get in, but I'm not really rooting against the Cubs. Anybody but the Yankees. We'll see when we get there. I think that whoever makes it should be a pretty even series, regardless of whether of who of the four teams make it. At this point, I guess I'm kind of more rooting for storylines, and the Dodgers haven't been since '88. Which was 10 years before Drew was born. Drew's never seen the Dodgers in a World Series game. And if it's a Dodgers-Yankee series, I mean, that's right back to history. That goes back to when I was a kid, and of course, back to the 40s and 50s when it was a true subway series, when the Dodgers were in Brooklyn, the Yankees were in the Bronx. Have a take on that, Drew?
I'm rooting for the Dodgers to make it to the World Series, but the Astros to beat them there. And I've been talking to my grandpa. He grew up a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and he always, like you said, he always talks about how the Dodgers could never get past the Yankees. They'd always make it to the World Series and just couldn't get past those Yankees. So there'll be a lot of great storylines with that series, but I would like to see the Dodgers and the Astros in the World Series with the Astros winning it.
Seth agrees with you. He says Dodgers versus Astros and Astros in 7. You go back to some of when I was a little kid, the Dodgers that made the World Series, their left fielder was somebody by the name of Baker, and their second baseman was somebody by the name of Lopes. Wonder what ever happened to them.
I don't know.
So like I said, I'm not going to be upset either way, even if the Yankees won. Well, not too upset if the Yankees win. Talking about Norfolk. Didn't this happen back in the day for the North? Although they were the Tidewater Tides, Seth. They were the Tidewater Tides. And they had some pretty good names roll through Tidewater. Dwight Gooden, Ron Darling, Sid Fernandez. Most of those great Mets pitchers up until, I believe, 2000 pitched their minor league ball down in Norfolk for Tidewater before they became the Orioles. Yeah, Judo says that Baker guy invented the high five. I think Virginia would be a better fit, but Nashville is certainly better than Vegas. And then you can look at Durham or Charlotte depending on what the Nats want to do. But again, it's a case that if the learners want to invest some money and buy a franchise, I'm sure people would listen. and you could have a long-term deal like the Yankees have with Scranton Wilkes-Barre, what the Red Sox have had with Pawtucket, and the Dodgers now have with Oklahoma City, and what Atlanta has in Gwinnett, and all that. So, I think that would just kind of settle down, and don't have to worry about renewing a deal every 2 years. Richmond would be as Drew said, Richmond would be the ideal, just because it's in Nats fan territory. Yeah, he did play. Dusty did play with Hank Aaron. All right, so we won't talk about the dumpster fire that is the National League East. The plan right now is that Drew and I will be with you every other Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And we will be with you as we work through the regular year when events warrant, such as a trade or managerial change or anything like that. But right now, the plan is, it works best for Drew's college schedule, is that we will be with you every Tuesday, every Sunday, every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, and go for about 30, 45 minutes like tonight, just to go through. But if we need to be there with you sooner, we will. And if Drew lands any more interviews, really, Tom Boswell as your first as a paid staffer. Do you know what happened my first night as a paid staffer?
Yeah, you said Strasburg got hurt and season was over.
Strasburg got hurt last year. That was my first night as a paid staffer. You know what happened on Drew's first day as a paid staffer? The site had a record for page views, and he interviews Tom Boswell.
Yeah, not a bad first day.
Not as old Vinny would say, not a bad opening act. All right, so the next time that we're scheduled to be with you, it'll be Halloween night. We'll keep Drew sober long enough to do the show. And no, because he's underage, so it's all Coke and water for him. And we'll be probably at the end of the World Series. So I guess I'll give my prediction too. I think the Dodgers win the World Series. I think it's over Houston as well, and I think it's in 6. And so with that, you can follow Drew on Twitter at
DrewRD98.
I'm at Ron Juckett. The website itself is District on Deck. I promise not to cry on the air anymore. Let's see what else. Give us a like and a follow on Facebook, District on Deck, and of course, like and subscribe to YouTube, where we will do these, like I said, every 2 weeks. We'll do them as needed, and the plan is right now to do what we did during the regular season. We won't do pre-games, but we will do our fair share of post games again, so we can be in touch with you. I don't know what we're doing tomorrow on the site, but today Brian Foley did on whether or not we should limit the innings of starting pitchers, and Drew did his wrap up of his wonderful interview with Tom Boswell yesterday. I did the 5 storylines for the offseason, which we kind of ran through here. And gosh, what was the other piece I did?
Billy Hamilton.
The whole trade thing, yeah. Which I promise I won't trade Michael Taylor again. I promise. So for Drew Douglas and the rest of the staff, by the way, if you want to write for the site, just drop us a note. We'd be happy to get you an application. I'm Ron Juckett, and we'll talk to you the next time.